This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony Nippy Ames, and this is A Little Bit Culty.
We woke up from a cult, and that journey was captured in The Vow on HBO and in my memoir, Scarred.
Now, in this podcast, we break down the shame and secrets that make these experiences so destructive with honest conversations on how seemingly benign groups can cross into the cultiverse and how to spot and recover from trouble if it happens to you.
Each week, we bring in experts, survivors, and whistleblowers to explore red flags, resilience, and even share a few laughs because sometimes you gotta laugh.
Subscribe to our Patreon for early and ad-free listening, some live Q&A, and exclusive content at patreon.com/alittleBitCulty.
Welcome to Season 8 of A Little Bit Culty.
Welcome back to A Little Bit Culty, everybody.
Today's episode is another heavy hitter. Bridget Read, features writer at New York Magazine and author of Little Bosses Everywhere, a gripping expose of the stranger-than-fiction world of multi-level marketing in America.
Bridget's research takes us from the boom of MLM salesmanship in sunny post-war California through the political corridors that let these schemes thrive.
We dig into why the 60s and 70s transformed California into a focal point for the MLMs, and the connection between Nexium's Keith Raniere and Amway, and how loopholes in politics keep these companies alive and growing.
Bridget breaks down how tactics once used in religious revivals and community building now fuel psychological control and manipulation in both commercial cults and the wider MLM industry.
Her reporting also shines a light on why women in vulnerable groups often become targets, and what happens when boss babes discover the hidden costs of empowerment.
We also touch on practical tips and warning signs listeners should keep an eye out for so nobody falls prey to the next golden opportunity in disguise.
Get ready for a fascinating conversation about capitalism, cults, and the very real cost of chasing the American dream.
Welcome, Bridget Read.
Bridget Read, welcome to A Little Bit Culty.
Thanks so much for having me.
When your book came out, we had so many people in our audience, not even request, demand an interview with you. So this is a much anticipated interview for our audience and for us, and we've so enjoyed your book and can't wait to talk to you.
MLMs, we meet again.
Yeah, you can't get away from them, can you?
Well, I have to admit something. I thought that, I didn't think I knew everything there was to know, but I was like, I got it. I understand how pervasive they are and how bad they are, whatever. I didn't really understand the layered nuances of the history and the politics and the religion that underscores this behemoth of a problem. You've just done this crazy journey. First of all, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you started to embark on this journey.
Before we start, I think that CD collection in the background is pretty boss.
This is in my partner's dad's office, and he's a recording engineer and worked on a bunch of crazy, amazing musicians' albums. And so this is all here. I can't take any credit for this. Yeah, so I'm a journalist. I'm a reporter at New York Magazine based in New York. I live in Brooklyn. And I write about all kinds of things. I do features. So I go down rabbit holes is kind of my job, which I feel so lucky to do. And in 2021, I was assigned a short article on MLMs, multi-level marketing companies, kind of pouncing on unemployed women during the pandemic. The demographics sort of shifted quickly, but at first in the pandemic, more women than men were sent home or lost their jobs or left their jobs to do childcare during the pandemic. So it was sort of referred to as a she session, which kind of, again, switched quickly. But we did a whole issue on that imbalance. And so I was just doing like a quick, kind of 1,000-word, 2,000-word article on multi-level marketing companies. And I really just couldn't do what I normally do when I'm writing anything really, but especially something fast about an industry. You kind of do your little summary paragraph of like, what is this? So I write about real estate. I write about, any kind of industry I wrote a story about cruise, people who were left behind by their cruise company on a remote island in Africa and had to get home. Anything that involves like a big industry and regulation and all this stuff, you do your quick and dirty to establish what's already out there so that you can then add whatever you're bringing to something new. And with multi-level marketing, it was just so difficult because there were so many contradictions. It didn't make sense. I couldn't understand. You look up the FTC ruling that makes it legal, but then it doesn't really answer enough questions. And you go to the FTC website and it says, this is legal, but you shouldn't do it. And you're like, what kind of industry is allowed to, like, that's just doesn't make any sense. It seems like thousands of people, millions of people across the country are doing it on their Instagrams, and it's so informal. But then also Donald Trump has been the face of an MLM, and some of the wealthiest American families are powered by MLM. So it was both informal and really obviously quite lucrative. So it just had all this contradiction. And I felt like even when I wrote that article, it was inadequate in terms of how I described how it worked. And so it just kind of stuck with me and just had this little like itch that I couldn't scratch. And so when I was talking to an agent about doing a different book, and I was like, well, that I don't really want to do, but there should be a book about this. And there had been, a few things out there, and other people had done a lot of work on it. One was Robert Fitzpatrick, who is kind of the oldest, longest running MLM critic. He's got a great book, but he self-published. And then Jane Marie, whose podcast, The Dream, is great and incredible. And I love that podcast. Her book, I don't think had come out yet. So, I was like, I should do one. And I would love to spend a book length amount of time going crazy about this topic. So that's what I did. And I really didn't, just like you said, Sarah, I also didn't understand how deep it would go. I honestly thought it would be a little more contemporary. There's so much more history in the book than I thought I would be looking at. There's so much more social history, economic history, like political history than I thought I would be doing. It's not my wheelhouse, but it just felt so necessary because nobody had really gone back besides really Bob, who I just mentioned, and looked that deeply.
Where do we start? Like, how far back do we want to go?
Well, I think something that, and hopefully some of your listeners have heard the other episodes on MLM or have listened to The Dream or just been exposed in other ways to how it really works. But something that helped me understand that was to go back to the actual invention of what this thing is and to really look at the primary sources that we have, which are really limited, but the actual materials from this first company. Multi-level marketing really operates on a lot of propaganda and a lot of myth making. This idea that like, first there was the door-to-door salesman, and that was sort of American icon, the Fuller Brush man or the Avon lady, and that's an industry that started in kind of the industrialization period of the United States when we were undergoing this like incredible rapid change and growth after the Civil War. So MLM likes to say that, there were door-to-door salesmen, and then these three guys kind of stumbled upon this amazing innovation where door-to-door salesmen could build their own teams and keep all the sales from the people under them and build these downlines. And it just sort of naturally evolved from there. And now, it's grown all over the world and almost like a natural evolution. The first MLM was this company called Nutrilite. It was a old vitamin company. This guy named Carl Renborg, who was a classic guru in that he had no training formally or informally in the thing he was a guru at, which was being a vitamin maker. He started this homemade vitamin company where his like miracle product was alfalfa pills. Again, this is just like a charlatan guy who tried to sell a lot of different things, called himself a scientist, had no scientific education.
Went to China.
Yes, went to China, tried to sell milk to Chinese people, which is, incredibly misguided given that most people in China are biologically lactose intolerant, but that kind of thing.
Didn't study the market.
Right. He's not even failing upward, just like failing in every direction. Anyway, so that was in the 20s and 30s. And so by the time the 40s roll around, these other two salesmen also sort of suspicious, shady in their own right. One was a psychiatrist who had trained at Stanford, but had then become a kind of self-help radio guy doing almost like marriage counseling and, vocational training on the radio, which obviously during the Depression was huge, right? Because people were really looking for work and depressed and everything. And then the other guy was a funeral plot salesman. going to recent widows and grandmothers and saying, oh, I got to upsell you, right, on this funeral plot. You can't just like pay for a normal burial. Let's get you signed up for the best coffin, the best grave site,
Gross.
a very notoriously scammy industry. So these guys come upon Renborg and his vitamin selling business, and they say, wow, we are going to use this to build a new selling operation. But what MLM doesn't tell you really is how it really worked, which was not like door-to-door selling at all. So door-to-door selling being a classic, basically wholesaler model, right? If you're a fuller brush salesman, you are availed of a wholesale price. You get to buy your brushes and whatever they were selling at a discount, and then you sell it to a customer for a higher price and you pocket the difference. And then the company takes some of that commission. So that's just a classic door-to-door salesman's model. What these guys did was get rid of that basic transaction entirely. And instead, they said, we're going to get a bunch of salesmen. Those salesmen can recruit other salesmen. And everyone's going to be rewarded on what all those salesmen are buying. So just that wholesale amount, what they're buying, we're going to call that purchase volume. And we're going to incentivize our salesmen. So the bigger team they grow, the more people paying in, buying their products, we're going to reward them. It does not matter if they actually sell these vitamins, the Neutralite vitamins, to anyone.
They just have to buy them.
Exactly. Bring people in. And if I am a great recruiter and I bring a bunch of salesmen under me and they're buying, the more I can get them to buy, the more I'm getting back from the company in the form of a rebate, which they call a commission to make it seem like something is being sold, but it's really a refund on what I'm buying and what everybody else is buying. And they said, we're a multi-million-dollar company because they're selling X amount of vitamins. They never had to prove they were being sold. They weren't being sold. They were filling people's basements. And of course, now that sounds like a classic pyramid scheme because this is where pyramid schemes come from. At the time, it looked maybe more like a Ponzi scheme, but no one had done this thing where they had taken what is essentially the mechanism of growth in a Ponzi scheme, right? Like robbing Peter to pay Paul, where you're just bringing in more marks, more investors, and growing the business that way. There's no real business, right? That's exactly what this business is. It just uses these products as a kind of cover.
Time to deprogram. Listen up for our sponsor's latest offer. Thanks for listening. Now let's resume our culty convo. I guess the $1 million question is, did they set this up with that scam in mind, or did they set it up thinking this was really an altruistic, we're giving them freedom? Like, how malevolent was it? I mean, from your estimation? Because it seems like they have a history of get rich quick.
Yeah, they do. They do. And right away, in order to bring people in, they were lying about the efficacy of the vitamins. They produced this booklet called How to Cheat Death that had all these crazy claims that it could cure cancer and, that these vitamins were. So they were already very much scamming people right away because, of course, they knew that wasn't true, right? To get people in. They set up, and this is a classic MLMs trait. So anyone who's been in an MLM will tell you the products are really expensive, like for the buyers already, right? Like Herbalife, for example, you're buying these shakes and teas and things that you can get at Costco, you can get at, Walgreens, whatever. But even to buy them as a distributor, they're really expensive. And you're told it's because they're like the best ever or whatever, or some lab somewhere has made them. It's always a secret that only your company knows. And so that is already really predatory. They were getting people to buy $20 worth of vitamins a month, which in 1945 is a huge amount of money. And the biggest thing I think is that, it relied on this endless expansion. Like the reason a Ponzi scheme is a fraud is because if you're buying into a scheme where the only way it's growing is getting other people in, and there's no real mechanism of growth, right? These guys, when they were talking up their business, they sort of openly said, these are statements that were in newspapers at the time that are included in my book. If this really worked, everyone in the world would be using this product. And they said it as a joke because of course it's a joke. Like not even everyone in the world, drinks Coca-Cola. There's no product that every single person in the world uses. But it was also, 1945 was like the dawn of this American era. Our population was exploding and everything was growing. And there was this maybe idea that really the United States, its products and its economic system would march across the whole world. And so, the most generous interpretation is like that they were really optimistic about the growth of the US and they thought that maybe these markets would go everywhere and there really would be just infinite customers for these vitamins. I don't think that's true because right away, and again, this is documented in the sort of early materials on this company, right away, people like ran out of territory, had to move, salespeople that started in the Midwest moved to California. They ran out of people right away. Very quickly, people took this model and just started their own company because they realized you make way more money as the company than even the best salespeople, So yeah, I think they knew what they were doing. And certainly the people that came after them knew what they were doing because people started complaining very quickly that like this idea that you were buying a bunch of vitamins and that you would sell them fell apart. People had a really hard time selling the vitamins right away. And every company is like that,
Why are vitamins so prevalent in all these MLMs? Why is nutrition the backbone of so many of them? I know it's not with all. There's insurance MLMs and makeup MLMs, right?
Yeah, it is. And it kind of, comes back around like by the time Herbalife, starts in the late 80s, wellness has come back around. When MLM was invented, nutrition was becoming sort of a household concept, like something that, people would go to the store and think about rather than like traditional, just sort of good health, eating well, things like that. But people understanding what vitamin B or vitamin C was. It had been around for a few decades, but it really was becoming, honestly, a marketable concept. Vitamins, they're not proven in terms of supplements. We don't really have research that like everyone should be taking supplements. Research has always shown that people who have vitamin deficiencies or mineral deficiencies should be taking those additives. But the idea that everyone needs to be scared of vitamin deficiencies and sort of proactively taking supplements, that's very much like something that comes from the supplement industry.
Yeah.
So that in itself is a bit of a scam in that it's something that really taps into fear, I think, fear of like health and longevity, but also like, are you taking care of your family? Are you being a productive citizen? Are you going to be valued in society? Are you going to be able to perform your best? I think nutrition really taps into that. I think that nutrition really helped people feel like they had some control. The Depression had made people feel really out of control. World War II, really out of control. These are giant global forces that are buffeting people back and forth. In the 50s, then we also had the Korean War. There was a really bad recession in the early 50s. So again, this should sound very familiar to all of us.
Yeah, I was going to say the parallels are like,
It gives people this feeling that they're controlling their own lives, but of course, they're just spending money on products. And those guys really, I think, the psychological aspect, the one man, William Castleberry, who was the Stanford psychologist, he had trained with Lewis Terman at Stanford, who created the IQ test. And these are men who called themselves in the 20s and 30s eugenicists, eugenics being truly the debunked science of race hierarchy, that there are people who have genetic characteristics that are more desirable than others, and that the people that don't have them should be weeded out. These are men who tried to use science to say that like women, but Black and brown women should be sterilized. Like they put, Black and brown youth in jail. This was, a fad, a scientific fad in the 20s and 30s. It came from Europe and spread to the US. It's very connected to Nazism and fascism. And so it fell out of favor in the 30s and 40s. But William Castleberry was a person who studied like the hierarchical ordering of people, of human beings, that some human beings are better as like cogs, like in a machine as workers, and other human beings get to be in charge of them.
that was based on race or character archetypes?
Race, gender, all kinds of, and they would try to back it up with, phrenology, for example, like studying people's head shapes and skull shapes. Like all of this is science that's been debunked.
Was it ideologically influenced?
Oh yeah. Yes,
Okay. All right.
absolutely. I think you really can see this in the way that MLM ends up working. Is it really in this system where you have to bring people in constantly? And like I said, right away, some people are failing. They're not bringing people in. They're also not selling these vitamins because it's kind of set up to fail. Immediately, we get this rhetoric of like individual performance and individualistic striving. So like if you're failing, it's your fault. It's very much a hierarchical system. And if you're at the bottom and you can't rise up, it's not because maybe you're just not so good at bringing people in. Maybe you're not good at like telling people how great this works when it's not working for yourself. And we can get into how, right away in MLM, you have to do that. You're lying to yourself, you're lying to your recruits, that you're told that if that's not working for you, you are failing. It's your own internal failure. So I think the roots, the political and sort of scientific or really pseudoscientific roots of MLM in this eugenics movement can be seen in how it really teaches people to internalize the idea that you might just not be as high performing as somebody else and that you should be punished for that, to accept what's happening to you.
So the gaslighting started early, really early.
It actually teaches you to metabolize and internalize that all by yourself and to continue to say, oh, I'm not working hard enough. I'm not meditating hard enough. I'm not listening to my audios. I'm not reading my books. From the very beginning, they were telling salesmen, if you want a Cadillac, cut out a picture of a Cadillac. It's got to be on your fridge. It's got to be in your drawers. You go to bed at night thinking of that Cadillac. You wake up, it's very much behavior, trying to modify your behavior. So you're always thinking about making money, moving up the ladder. You're never thinking about, why am I struggling to sell this item? Why am I even trying to sell this item door to door that can be bought in the pharmacy? Because even back then, vitamins were at the grocery store in the pharmacy. It makes no sense.
Let's take a little break from the cultiverse. Here's a word from our sponsors. Thank you for listening. Now, let's dive back into the cultiverse. I'm curious, as a little bit of a sidebar, but I think it's important. Do you have any belief personally in like manifesting or positive thinking? And when does it go to like being positive and having a positive outlook versus toxic positivity and sort of scammy bullshit secret crap?
Oh, that's so funny. That's such a good question. It's such a fine line. I think anybody that's gone through something traumatic, I've definitely had things in my life where fake it till you make it is important just for survival. And I even think, for example, like professionally, like being a journalist, I think to like have the confidence to go try to get a story, it often involves like, just pretending that you can do this. So I sort of weirdly do subscribe, I think, to like, to some version of positive thinking. If you look at the way that it has been used in MLM, it's always been nefarious and always been something that I think is fundamentally coercive. If positive thinking is at the expense of critical thinking, that's the problem. Positive thinking, I think, as a mood alterer in the kind of immediate, like I think somatic therapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy, there are ways that you can actually use positive thinking in the moment to like truly just get yourself out of something acute.
In sports, it's a feature for people who are successful. Like you have to have it.
Absolutely. I'm watching the US Open right now. Mental toughness is the only thing that keeps tennis players from like flipping out on the court, right? Is like pretending that they're not in a giant stadium of people. But here, right away, the kind of positive thinking texts in the early part of MLM history that these guys were using. So one was Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Hill actually wrote an early kind of article that was syndicated across all these newspapers about Mittinger and Castleberry, the two salesmen. So I don't know if they paid him to do that, but they were big Think and Grow Rich fans. The other early MLM company founders were constantly reading Think and Grow Rich. They were writing their own self-help versions of it and just like basically slapping their names on it. And Think and Grow Rich is very much about how wealth and money, it really is a money cult, that you should constantly be thinking about wealth and money, that anyone that tells you that, all men are created equal, and any kind of egalitarian rhetoric or even Christian rhetoric, like the idea that one should be always helping your fellow man, that he takes these things and he like flips them on its head. They're very much trying to teach people that rather than being greedy, being obsessed with money is good. And so right away, it's kind of like inhabiting concepts that people know and twisting them in a really manipulative way. And The Power of Positive Thinking, which is another book, Norman Vincent Peale wrote that book. He's also associated with early MLM. He was a preacher who eventually ended up at Marble Collegiate Church in Manhattan, which became Donald Trump's church. And this was the guy preaching when Donald Trump was a child and coming into Manhattan to go to church from Queens.
Wow.
And this guy, again, this was the 1950s and then 60s, where there was a lot of unrest in the United States, a lot of question of equality and social equality. And this guy was saying in his preaching, don't pay attention to any of that. Don't read the news. Don't talk about anything negative. Just like constantly focus on the positive, focus on what you can control. And that becomes, I think, really harmful when you're basically being coached not to pay attention to what's around you, like to be dumb, basically.
Yeah, it justifies you dismissing a lot of things that could be positive for your overall growth as a human being.
And to ignore the things that you should be paying attention to. By the way, I just want to tell you that in Nexium, we didn't use the word recruiting. It was enrolling, which was synonymous with building humanity. We were sharing the tools, and building humanity all at once.
Sharing the tools.
Why wouldn't you want to be compensated for building humanity? Because that's...
Make something that's a little bit dirty feel
It always did feel dirty until it got EM'd out of us. Which is
the language. The language felt more nurturing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And also catered to my nurturing.
More altruistic to share something than to sell something.
Yeah.
Totally. And, for so many MLMs, very quickly in the 60s, MLMs, pivot and they add makeup, and Mary Kay starts Mary Kay, and very much women become the people who are mostly in MLM. In the early part, in the 50s, it was a lot of like white heterosexual couples, like kind of suburbia, Leave It to Beaver. Like those were a lot of the people being targeted. But as the labor market shifted in the US, and a lot of women were looking to supplement their income, they were still doing childcare, or they were maybe going to work, but in kind of sectors like retail, or they were clerking, whatever, and they actually needed to make more money. MLM really offered itself as this like flexible work because you're an independent contractor. You don't just, check in anywhere. You're not doing a 9 to 5. But women, I think, were especially like targeted by this language of exactly what you're saying, Sarah, like nurturing and sharing and sisterhood. It was seen as empowerment.
Are you familiar with Edward Bernays, The Century of the Self? He was Freud's nephew. Long story short is when he was trying to get everyone to transition from a needs-based economic model, he started to prey on people's desires. And there was a parade in New York City, and he targeted women to sell cigarettes more because the tobacco company went to them and said, listen, help us with this. And he targeted women really successfully by having the phallic symbol. Like they now had penises too. And their sales took off.
I think it makes perfect sense because women were being targeted as this newly empowered or on the brink of empowerment cohort, right? If like in the 50s, it was like men are going to be men, like the kind of Mad Men era.
Yeah,
exactly.
Mad Men. Yeah.
Exactly. You're going to get this really gendered, really sort of like typical nuclear family. And so they're targeting like men. This is how you can become millionaires. In the 60s, it's like women. This is how you can actually like improve your family's health, but you're doing it in this way where it's not too threatening, right? Like Mary Kay would say, the best thing about doing your Mary Kay is you can still be home to like be cooking dinner when your husband comes home. So we're not upending the apple cart, right? We're not doing like bra burning.
We're integrating with it.
You're not a total boss babe yet. You're still cooking dinner for your husband.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Before we get into part 2, I just want to really quickly touch on, we're looking at these, the mindset idea behind, which runs parallel to the MLMs, actually goes back to like the antebellum period, which we haven't really talked about yet. And I had to go and like Google, because I'm Canadian, I don't really know American history so well. And it's so interesting. What a gift of our podcast is like, I'm reading some other books that like hone in specifically on Christian Science or hone in on New Thought. But seeing how all of this comes together as the foundation or the tapestry to what comes next with MLM, it just blows my mind. Can you give like a little summary about those two groups and how that plays into what we now know as MLM and goal setting and manifesting and all that shit?
Oh my God, yes. And there are people who are so much better equipped than me because I also had to do kind of like a survey when I was writing this book, but a lot of these texts like The Power of Positive Thinking and Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, which of course, both of these like still go majorly viral on TikTok. Rhonda Byrne's The Secret, that book is almost like lifted from those other books. Like it's all the same crap. That's like, so it's very relevant. Like everyone should be able to like get these red flags that come up when you read something about like drawing money from an energy spirit, right? Like the alarm bells should go off. But anyway, so New Thought is the kind of best umbrella term for this tradition of American mysticism that kind of comes out after the Civil War, that period I referenced earlier, when rapid industrialization and urbanization, the United States is just undergoing this like incredible period of change, where before we were really an agrarian republic, we were farmers. And suddenly there are cities, there's just incredibly different social relations. And then actually related to what you were talking about, Nippy, we're very quickly changing how the economy works, right? Like instead of people basically being self-sufficient in their little households, we now have industry and people are going to work in industry. It really changes everyone's relationships to each other. And actually women are a huge part of this story because women also, their roles are totally upended, right? Their traditional roles in the home. So a lot of scholars who've studied New Thought have said that Christian Science, for example, which is one of the biggest religions. I mean, it is a religion that comes out of this New Thought movement, but a lot of it is about how you can change your body. You can change your physical health
with your mind.
With your mind. A lot of New Thought, that's kind of the umbrella, is any tradition that says that you can really influence the outside world with your mind. This one scholar, he calls them money mystics because they really are like, you know, telling you that you can, that money is something that you can, something physical that you can actually create from kind of energy. So yeah, I mean, the roots of that are so deep. And then what the MLM guys do is very much make it like part of their educational programming. You know, you are supposed to read these books as MLM participants. And when they write their own, the early guys, like after Nutrilite, immediately there's a copy called Abundavita. That creates a copy called NutriBio. NutriBio was probably the first real pyramid scheme, and that it spread really quickly, way quicker than Nutrilite across the United States and Canada. And it makes sense because they invented something that is like incredibly predatory and relies immediately on a bunch of people joining who are going to fail. You have to have tons of new people in. Right. Like you might get one unicorn. Most people are going to fail.
Societal upheaval certainly helps their cause.
100%.
And also what helps their cause is the fact that people that start it are the proof in the pudding, because look at their wealth, look at their furs, look at their Cadillacs, but nobody's looking at the fact that the people at the bottom are just feeding that and that they'll never reach that point, which I think is sort of the myth that we hope to bust with doing, you know, talking with you and having these episodes. Is there's so many people out there that really believe, because they're so caught up in all of that indoctrination, education, and the tools, which we'll get into in maybe part 2, that they have to purchase, right? That's part of their overhead, is to listen to the tapes and all these things. That's just reinforcing.
By the business model.
Yeah. We now have 50 plus years of evidence that MLM not only just produces this incredibly unequal pyramid structure where there's a fraction of people making money and most people are losing money. We now have enough evidence to say, I think, that it relies on that. That is part of the structure. That is intended, is to have a ton of people paying, a ton of people losing money in order to funnel wealth up to the top. Time and time again, this is what happens. Even in the oldest and longest running MLMs, people are constantly buying, they're constantly spending money, and the majority of people are losing out. So of course that has to be coercive, because why would people stay in that?
Yeah, and of course they're not looking at it, because with things like Think and Grow Rich, where they're manifesting and just believing. And as you're talking, I'm going, God, I was such a good recruit for NXIVM, because I was already that kind of person. I was already very positive. I've always had sort of like can do, like don't tell me no, I'll figure it out kind of attitude. Sorry, Nippy. This is where it comes from. Like I don't take no for an answer very easily. I'm like, we can do this. And like, it doesn't matter what the naysayers say. But I just had a thought, where was it? Was it on The Dream with Jane Marie where she debunked Napoleon Hill's even credibility in the first place? Like he was proven to be a con artist too, right?
I haven't listened to it in a while, but I'm sure she has an episode
It's
on
somewhere
Napoleon
there.
Hill. And there's a great long article that I cite in my book in Gizmodo, which I don't know if it exists anymore, but it was a great internet site. But anyway, yes, that journalist also like just lays out how Napoleon Hill, his entire life, was a con man. He had like a fake automotive school where he was also getting students to pay to like build cars. He abused his wife. He created like a fake investing school that was really just securities fraud all over the United States, like running from Illinois to like, yeah, he was a con artist his whole life, but was embraced by MLM after he was associated with Neutralite. One of the craziest MLMs, Holiday Magic, which ended up having not just, it was a purported, they sold makeup, just like crappy makeup, but they ended up having an additional MLM that was pure cult, pure self-help cult crap called Leadership Dynamics Institute and Mind Dynamics Institute. This is in the 60s in San Francisco with a very much cult element, a violent cult element, where they were getting these salesmen to do these leadership training seminars where they were like beating each other up. And we can talk about that.
Yes. Well, that's actually a great place to pause for part 2, because LDI, that confrontational institute goal setting, whatever you want to call that, churned out Werner Erhard, who started EST. And then we have other correlations with people like Tony Robbins that comes later. And then, of course, we haven't even talked about Amway, which Keith Raniere dabbled in. And all of that will come back after this break in part 2 with Bridget Read.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
We hope you're enjoying A Little Bit Culty. If so, please do show us some love. Drop a rating or leave a review. Hit subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/alittlebitculty.
Even better, send this episode to someone who needs it. Maybe they're in a cult. Maybe they're just a little bit susceptible. Or maybe they just love a good story. Spread the word, spread the love. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
A Little Bit Culty is a Trace 120 production.
Executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames in collaboration with producer Will Rutherford at Citizens of Sound. Our co-creator is Jess Temple Tardy.
Our production coordinator is Leslie Dinsmore.
Writing by Sandra Namoto and social media marketing by Eric Swarzinski and Brooke Keene.
Our theme song, Cultivated, is by the artists John Bryant and Nigel Aslan.
Shopify's point of sale system helps you sell at every stage of your business. Need a fast and secure way to take payments in person? We've got you covered. How about card readers you can rely on anywhere you sell?
Thanks. Have a good one.
Yep, that too. Want one place to manage all your online and in-person sales? That's kind of our thing. Wherever you sell, businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 a month trial at shopify.com/listen. Shopify.com/listen.
Wherever you go, whatever they get into, from chill time to everyday adventures, protect your dog from parasites with Credelio Quattro. For full safety information, side effects, and warnings, visit CredeliaQuattroLabel.com. Consult your vet or call 1-888-545-5973. Ask your vet for Credelio Quattro and visit QuattroDog.com.